The humans' forced marriage to a 33 years older alien took a turn no one saw coming. The sky above Colony 9 was the color of iron, cold and quiet. The wind carried dust and the faint hum of engines from distant factories. In the middle of that gray morning, a human named Evan Hawley stood outside the grand marble building of the Unity office, holding a small piece of paper that had changed his life. It said, "Mandatory assignment, Interspecies Unity Program, partner designation, Lady Kara of Velther." He read it again, hoping it was some mistake, but it wasn't. Guards in black armor waited for him by the door, their faces hidden behind glass masks. One of them said in a flat voice, "Citizen Hawley, proceed inside. Your match is waiting." Evan swallowed hard. He had heard rumors about this Unity program. They said it was a peace project to bond humans and aliens after years of war. But no one mentioned it meant forced marriage. No one said you could be assigned a spouse. And certainly not one from a species known for despising humans. Inside, the air was colder. Tall pillars rose around him, covered in glowing alien symbols. The clerk, a thin woman with metallic eyes, scanned his wrist chip and nodded. "Congratulations," she said without emotion. "Your wife is waiting in Chamber 12. Evan almost laughed. But his voice didn't come out. He followed silently. Every step echoed down the silver hall until he stood before a massive door carved with strange patterns that seemed to move when he looked too long. The door opened with a hiss. And there she was, Lady Kara. She stood tall and still, her silver-blue skin shining faintly in the low light. Her eyes glowed golden like molten metal. Her hair, white as frost, fell over robes that looked older than the room itself. Everything about her said power and danger. She was 33 years older than him by human count. Yet her alien body seemed untouched by time. Cold beauty, sharp elegance, and no warmth at all. Evan froze. He had faced plasma storms, broken reactors, and hungry nights, but this moment felt heavier than all of that. Her gaze moved to him, studying, measuring. "So this is the human they send me," she said. Her voice smooth but filled with quiet authority. Evan tried to speak. "I didn't volunteer for this." "I know," she replied. Turning away, "None of you ever do." Two alien priests entered, holding a glowing orb between them. One recited ancient words in the Velthuri language. Evan didn't understand a single sound. He stood there, lost. While they placed the orb between their hands, the orb pulsed, sending a beam of light that marked both of their wrists. A glowing symbol appeared, a binding sigil. The moment it touched his skin, Evan felt it burn cold, as if something had crawled inside him. "It is done," said the priest. "You are now one under the treaty." Kyra's eyes met his again. Unreadable to her, it was duty, not choice, to him. It was a prison disguised as peace. Outside, people gathered behind shimmering barriers to watch the ceremony. Some whispered, others laughed quietly. A human marrying an alien diplomat, what a sight. The cameras of the galactic network flashed, turning the event into a spectacle. Evan wanted to shout, to run, but soldiers waited nearby, their weapons ready. He forced himself to stay still, his whole world reduced to one silent moment under her gaze. When the ceremony ended, Kira spoke to the guards in her language. Then she turned to him. "You will follow," she said. Her tone was not cruel, but it left no room for refusal. They entered a hovering car that moved without sound, gliding through the sky toward the outer cliffs of the colony. Evan stared out the window as the city fell behind them. Metal towers became distant specks, and soon there was only wind and the deep violet sea below. Finally, the car stopped before a dark structure built into the cliffs. Kyra's mansion. The building looked like something from another world. Black glass walls rose high, reflecting the clouds. Glowing vines of silver light crept across the stone like veins. When the gate opened, strange alien servants bowed low. Avoiding his eyes, no one spoke to him. He felt like an unwanted object being carried into a museum. Inside, everything shimmered faintly crystals. Mirrors and whispering devices filled the air with soft sounds. Kira dismissed the servants with a wave of her hand. Then she turned to Evan. "You will stay in the East Chamber," she said. "You are not to enter my quarters without invitation." He nodded slowly, unsure what to say. Her golden eyes softened for a fraction of a second. But then the cold mask returned. At dinner, she sat across a long table silent. The food looked strange bright fruits, glowing broth, and meat that shifted color. He didn't eat much when he tried to thank her for the meal. She only said, "We are bound by treaty, not by choice. Do not pretend it is more." Her words stung. He wanted to reply, but before he could, she stood up and left the room. Hours later, Evan sat by the window of his new room. Staring at the endless sea below, he felt trapped. Like a bird locked in a cage made of light. Outside, lightning flickered across the horizon, and for a moment, he thought he saw her standing on the balcony, watching the storm, her robe waving in the wind. Her face looked sad, lonely, almost human. He didn't know why, but something inside him whispered that this story was only beginning. And what began as a forced marriage would soon become something the galaxy never expected. As the scene fades, the narrator's gentle voice adds, "If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to HFY Sci-Fi for more tales of humans, aliens, and the strange power of compassion." The Night King quietly over the alien mansion. The ocean below whispered against the cliffs, glowing faintly with strange blue light. Inside, the walls seemed alive, breathing with slow pulses of energy that traveled through the crystal veins embedded in the stone. Evan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the symbol burned onto his wrist. It still glowed faintly under the moonlight, coming through the tall window. He rubbed it again and again, trying to forget what it meant. A mark of ownership, a mark of peace, or perhaps a curse. He looked around the chamber. It was beautiful but cold. The furniture seemed carved from one single piece of silver crystal. The air smelled faintly of ozone and alien flowers. There were no pictures, no warmth, no memory of life. Everything felt too perfect, too clean, like a place built for someone who had forgotten what comfort was. Evan thought of Kyra, her golden eyes, her commanding voice, her silence. He had seen power before on the battlefields, in officers, but not like this. Her power was quiet, buried deep under centuries of loss and pride. He didn't know why, but part of him wanted to understand her, and another part wanted to run far away. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, the walls hummed louder. He heard footsteps echoing in the corridor. Soft, measured, deliberate. He waited, holding his breath, then a knock. Gentle, slow, only once. He stood up quickly. "Who's there?" No answer. He opened the door. The corridor outside was empty. Only the faint glow of the wall lights. He stepped out, looking both ways. The air was colder than before. Something metallic drifted through the air like a whisper. Then he saw it, lying on the floor, a silver scarf folded neatly. Glowing with soft blue light, he picked it up, feeling the strange texture, smooth like silk, but alive with warmth. He had seen it before. It belonged to Kira. He looked around again, uneasy. Was she here just moments ago, watching him? He took a step forward, and the door behind him closed by itself with a heavy click. Locked, the scarf shimmered faintly in his hands. He heard faint whispers from the end of the hall, alien words carried on the wind. It didn't sound like talking. It sounded like chanting, slow and low. Evan followed the sound carefully. The hall turned, leading him down into a dim chamber lit by floating crystals. There, through a half-open door, he saw her. Kyra knelt before a tall blue flame that burned inside a transparent sphere. She was whispering to it. Her long hair floated gently, as if the air moved only around her. The scarf he held in his hands glowed brighter, reacting to her presence. He realized he was watching something sacred, something she didn't want anyone to see. A ritual, maybe a memory, maybe grief. He should have walked away, but he couldn't. Something about her voice pulled him in. It was sad. Full of pain, he took one quiet step forward. Then another. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open. Gold and bright, burning like fire, the flame flickered. And the door slammed open. In a heartbeat, she was standing right in front of him. "How dare you?" she whispered. Her voice was low. Trembling not with anger, but with fear, Evan stammered. "I heard something. I didn't mean to intrude." She grabbed his wrist. The same one marked by the glowing sigil. "You touched what is forbidden," she hissed. The blue flame behind her flared higher, casting their shadows across the wall. Evan looked into her eyes and saw something there, something raw, broken, not hatred, not fury, but sorrow. He spoke quietly. "You were crying, weren't you?" Her grip loosened, her expression froze. No one had ever dared ask her that, for a moment. The silence between them stretched like glass, ready to shatter. Then she pulled away, turning sharply. "Go back to your room," she ordered, her voice sharp again. "Do not walk these halls after midnight." Human. He wanted to ask why, but her back was already turned. The doors closed behind him with a hiss. Evan stood alone in the hall, still holding her scarf. It no longer glowed, it had gone cold. When he looked back at his room door, the lock light blinked red. He realized she had sealed him in, but before he could lie down, he noticed something new on the window glass. A faint handprint, hers glowing gold for a single heartbeat before fading away. He didn't know what it meant, but deep inside, he felt it. This mansion was full of secrets. And the woman he was forced to marry was not what she seemed. The night stretched long, and somewhere below, the sea roared against the cliffs like a sleeping beast. Evan didn't sleep. He just stared into the dark, holding that cold silver scarf, wondering what he had just seen and what waited for him next. Morning arrived, but it felt like night never truly left. The alien mansion stayed dim, its walls glowing faintly with moving veins of blue light. Evan hadn't slept. He sat near the window, the silver scarf folded beside him. His mind kept replaying what he saw: Kyra kneeling before that blue flame, whispering words that made the air itself tremble. He didn't understand them, but the sadness in her voice had carved a mark inside him that wouldn't fade. When the door finally unlocked with a soft hum, he stepped into the corridor. No guards, no servants, only silence. He followed the hall toward the main chamber. The mansion felt different in daylight, beautiful, but haunted. Every wall shimmered like water. Every corner watched him. It was as if the house was alive. Breathing softly when he passed, he entered the great hall. Strange artifacts floated inside glass domes, fragments of alien weapons. Crystals shaped like eyes, and portraits that moved slightly when you weren't looking. Evan's reflection shifted inside one of them, then vanished. He frowned, stepping closer. There were no mirrors in the mansion, only these dark reflective panels. He touched one, and for a split second he saw Kyra's face, not now, but younger, standing on a battlefield under a blood-red sky. Her armor cracked, her hands covered in glowing blue blood. Behind her, thousands lay still, and the image vanished, leaving only his own pale reflection. He stumbled back, heart racing. What was that? He whispered, A voice answered quietly from behind him. "You shouldn't touch the memory glass." Evan turned fast. It was one of Kyra's servants. A thin alien woman with gray skin and silver eyes that never met his memory glass? He asked. She nodded slowly. "It remembers what its master cannot bear to forget. Why are there no mirrors here?" He asked. The servant froze for a moment, then whispered, "Because she cannot look at herself anymore." And before he could ask more, she hurried away, her footsteps almost silent. Evan walked deeper into the hall, his curiosity battling his fear. He found another door, sealed with a glowing lock. But his wrist marked the marriage sigil flashed faintly, and the door opened. Inside was a room filled with quiet humming light. Shelves lined with data crystals, each marked with Kyra's family crest. In the center stood that same blue flame crystal, smaller but identical to the one from last night. When he touched the table near it, his mark pulsed again, and the crystal came to life. A holographic image flickered in the air. Kyra, standing beside a young alien boy, smiling faintly, her voice, soft and full of warmth, said, "To my son, Taren, may peace return to our stars." Then static filled the air. The image changed explosions, fire, screams. The boy's face vanishing in the light of destruction, and Kyra's scream echoing through the room. "No Taren." The vision shattered. Evan stood frozen, breathing hard, his heart pounding. He realized she had lost someone, maybe the only person she ever loved, and that loss had never healed. A sudden sound broke his thoughts' footsteps. Sharp and fast, he turned to see Kira standing in the doorway, her eyes blazing gold. The air seemed to tighten around her, like gravity itself obeyed her anger. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Evan stammered. "I was just looking. Your door was open." "Lear," she hissed. Walking closer, the blue flame behind her flared high, and the energy in the room trembled. "You touched the memories." Her voice was low, dangerous. "I didn't mean to invade your past," Evan said quickly. "I just wanted to understand." For a moment she said nothing. Her eyes flicked to the holographic image, still faintly flickering behind him. Her and her son. Frozen in time, something in her expression cracked. Her voice softened. "There is nothing to understand. Human, only ghosts." She turned away, but her hands trembled slightly. He stepped forward, quietly. "You lost someone, didn't you?" She stopped. The silence was so deep, it felt like the house itself held its breath. Finally, she whispered, "You know nothing of loss." Then, with a flick of her hand, the room's lights went dark, and Evan felt invisible hands push him backward. Out of the chamber, the door sealed behind him with a metallic hiss. He stood in the corridor again, chest heaving. The blue light of the walls pulsed like a heartbeat. He realized he had seen only a glimpse of her truth, and that glimpse was enough to know Lady Kyra's strength was built on broken things. The mansion around her wasn't a palace. It was a prison of memory. And now, somehow, he was trapped inside it with her. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. Shaking the cliffs, Evan whispered to himself, "What kind of world did I marry into?" But deep down, a strange feeling stirred, not just fear. Something like empathy, something that would soon change everything. Days turned into weeks inside the strange alien mansion. And yet, the silence between Evan and Lady Kyra stayed heavy. They spoke only when duty demanded it. Meals were eaten apart. Messages were passed through servants, and eyes rarely met. But Evan had seen enough to know that under all her coldness lived a grief too deep to hide. And somehow, he couldn't leave it alone. The mansion itself began to break down. Energy lines flickered across the ceilings. Doors hissed when they opened. The generators hummed like wounded beasts. Servants whispered of neglect. No one dared to fix anything not without her permission. But Evan was an engineer. He had spent years repairing reactors and life support systems for colonies barely holding together. He couldn't sit idle while the walls cracked around them. So one night, when the lights dimmed again, he took his tools and began to work. He climbed through narrow maintenance shafts, replaced broken fuses, sealed leaking pipes, rewired old conduits. He didn't care if she found out. All he wanted was to make this place breathe again, to show that not everything in her world had to stay broken. The next morning, the lights in the hall burned brighter. The air felt fresher. Even the servants seemed to move with less fear. Evan was covered in grease and sweat when Kyra finally appeared. She stopped, watching him kneeling beside an energy core, tightening the last bolt, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. "Fixing what's dying," he said. Without looking up. "You had no permission," she replied. He stood, wiping his hands. "Then punish me later." But this house was collapsing. Her golden eyes narrowed. "You think you can repair what you don't understand?" Evan met her gaze, steady. "Maybe not, but at least I try." That answer caught her off guard. No one ever talked to her like that, not even her own guards. She took a slow breath. "You humans always think you can fix everything with your hands." Evan smiled faintly. "Maybe not everything, but sometimes hands are all we have." For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then she turned, her robe brushing the floor. As she walked away, she said softly, "You are reckless, human, but not without heart." Evan froze. It was the first almost kind thing she had ever said. That evening, he found a small metal token on his table. Silver, with her family crest engraved on it. It shimmered with faint gold light. He didn't know why she left it there, but somehow it felt like a truce. Days passed, and something began to shift. She no longer locked his door. Sometimes she walked with him through the gardens that overlooked the violet sea. Sometimes she even listened as he spoke of earth, of rain, cities, laughter, and music, things her world had long forgotten. He saw how her eyes softened when he spoke of children playing in dirt. Maybe she saw her lost son in those words. Maybe she saw hope, but peace never lasted long in the galaxy. One evening, as the two stood near the balcony, a faint alarm echoed from the distant watchtower. Kyra turned sharply. Her servants ran in, panicked. "My lady." "The rebels? They've breached the perimeter." Evan frowned. "Rebels?" She nodded grimly. "Velthari extremists, they reject the Unity Treaty, and they kill any human who enters their territory." He saw something flicker in her eyes, fear. Not for herself, but for him. "Go to your chamber," she ordered. Her voice hard again. "No," Evan said firmly. "I'm not hiding." "This isn't your war," she snapped. "Maybe not," he said quietly. "But it's my home now." Before she could answer, the first explosion rocked the mansion. The lights flickered, walls shook, and the sound of plasma rifles filled the air. Evan grabbed a broken pipe from the floor, heart pounding through the smoke. Alien silhouettes moved, rebels in jagged armor, shouting in their harsh tongue. Kyra raised her hand, her eyes blazing gold, unleashing a wave of energy that threw them back. But there were too many. One fired a plasma bolt straight toward her. Evan didn't think he just moved. He pushed her aside, the bolt grazing his arm and shattering the wall behind them. She turned in shock. "You fool. You'll die." He gritted his teeth. "Then we die fighting." The two stood back to back, human and alien, surrounded by smoke and fire. And in that chaos, she saw him not as a prisoner, not as a forced partner, but as something else entirely. A soul that refused to bow. A soul that refused to bow. A heart that refused to stop caring. When the last rebel fell, silence returned. The mansion was scarred, Walls cracked, air thick with dust. Kyra collapsed against a column, her robe torn, her side bleeding with glowing blue light. Evan caught her before she hit the ground. Her voice was faint, trembling. "Why would you protect me?" He smiled weakly. "Because. No one deserves to die alone." And in that single moment, her hand gripped his, tight, desperate, alive. The sea outside roared louder than before. Lightning flashed across the alien sky. And deep inside her wounded heart, something ancient began to stir again. Something that had been buried for decades. Something dangerously close to love. Smoke curled through the shattered halls like a living shadow. The great mansion of Lady Kyra, once a symbol of power, now burned and trembled beneath the echo of plasma fire. Evan's ears rang with every explosion, every scream, every crack of falling stone. He dragged Kyra behind a column, her blue blood staining his hands, glowing faintly under the flickering lights. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. "Stay down," he said, breathless. Her eyes narrowed. "You dare command me?" He gave a small grin through the chaos. "Someone has to." Outside, the rebel ships roared overhead, dropping troops like sparks from the sky. The Velthari extremists had come in full force, dozens of them, wearing armor black as glass and eyes burning red with hatred. They weren't here for treasure or conquest. They were here to erase the shame of the Unity Treaty. And killing the highest-ranking diplomat who had married a human would send their message clear across the stars. Kyra pressed her hand to the wound on her side. Grimacing, energy flickered around her fingers. She tried to summon her power, but the blast had weakened her control. "I can still fight," she said through her teeth. Evan shook his head. "You'll die. And I'll die as a Velthari warrior." "Not as a prisoner," she replied sharply. He met her gaze, steady, fearless. "Not today." He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped her wound. The warmth of her blood made his hands tremble. But when he looked at her face, strong, proud, defiant, something inside him refused to surrender. The human in him burned with stubborn fire. He wasn't leaving her behind. From the hall above came a deafening crash, rebels breaking through the upper floors. Evan grabbed a fallen plasma pistol and checked its charge. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was an engineer, a builder, a man of reason. But when the door burst open and 3 rebels stormed in, he fired without hesitation. The recoil burned his arm, but 2 fell instantly. The 3rd lunged forward with a blade made of vibrating crystal. Evan barely blocked it with a metal rod. The sound shrieking through the air, Kyra raised her hand weakly. A burst of gold light shot from her palm, hurling the rebel against the wall. The impact left a smoking mark. She fell to her knees. Gasping, Evan caught her, his voice rough. "You can't keep doing that. You'll kill yourself." She smiled faintly, her voice breaking. "Then let me die protecting what's mine." "You don't own me," he said quietly. Her golden eyes softened. "No. But perhaps I should have tried to understand you." Before he could answer, the ground shook again. Something massive had landed outside. A shadow loomed through the smoke, an assault drone 3 meters tall, its weapons glowing red. It turned toward them, sensors locking on to the heat of their bodies. Evan shouted, "Run!" But Kyra pushed him aside, raising her trembling hand one last time. A wave of light exploded from her, shattering glass and stone. The drone staggered, but didn't fall, its cannon charging for another shot. Evan didn't think. He sprinted across the hall, grabbed a plasma cell from the wreckage, and jammed it into the drone's power vent. The machine screamed in metallic fury as sparks burst from its core. Evan threw himself over Kyra, shielding her just as the explosion tore through the chamber. The blast wave hurled them both against the floor, dust and fire raining from above. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, coughing, Evan opened his eyes. Kyra lay in his arms, her breath shallow, her silver hair streaked with ash. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly. "You fool," she whispered. "You would risk everything for me?" He smiled weakly. "Didn't I tell you? Not everything's about treaties." Her hand trembled as it touched his face. Humans. Always so strange. Outside, the surviving rebels were retreating. The explosion had triggered a power collapse in their weapons. The mansion was half destroyed, but somehow they were alive. The storm outside finally broke. Rain pouring through the shattered roof, hissing against the fires. Evan helped her to her feet, his arm bleeding, his body trembling with exhaustion. They stood together amid the ruined two souls who should have been enemies, now united by survival. And for the first time, Kyra looked at him not as a burden, not as a human forced upon her, but as a partner, a heartbeat in the chaos, a reason to keep living. As lightning flashed across the alien sea, her voice came soft, almost breaking. "Evan, perhaps peace is not something written on treaties. It's something we build. With hands like yours." He looked at her, rain running down his face. "Then let's rebuild it together." In the distance, the thunder roared again. But now it sounded less like war and more like applause. And somewhere deep in the heart of the galaxy, the first fragile seed of love began to grow in the ashes of violence. Rain poured over the broken mansion, washing away the smoke and blood. The once golden halls now shimmered with blue sparks and the quiet hum of dying machines. Evan guided Kyra through the debris, her steps weak, her silver robe torn and soaked in rain. He could feel her trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Her body was losing strength, the light under her skin fading. "We need to stop the bleeding," he said quickly. She tried to shake her head, whispering, "Save yourself. I am not worth it." He stopped walking and looked her in the eyes. "You don't get to decide that." They reached a small side chamber, half collapsed, but still standing. It used to be a study, a quiet place, filled with strange alien books and holographic maps of stars he'd never seen. Evan helped her lie on the floor, tearing what was left of his sleeve to bandage the wound again. Her blood shimmered under his touch, glowing faintly. Every pulse of light matched the weak beat of her heart. He worked fast, his hands shaking but careful. When he finished, he looked at her face, her breathing shallow, her expression calm but distant. "Why?" she whispered suddenly, her voice barely there. "Why risk your life for me, human?" He took a slow breath, wiping the rain from her cheek. "Because you're not the monster they said you were," he said softly. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion and disbelief mixing with something softer. She tried to speak, but her voice broke halfway. Evan continued, "I don't care if you hate humans, or if the galaxy calls you cold. I saw you cry. I saw you protect me. I saw you fight to save your home. And that's enough." For a long moment, neither spoke. A sound of rain filled the room, echoing against the cracked ceiling. Finally, Kyra whispered, "You should not have seen that ritual. Human, it was not meant for your kind." Evan frowned. "What was it?" She closed her eyes, her voice trembling. "It was how we remember the dead. The blue flame is a link to the souls we lost." She paused, her breath unsteady. "I was calling to my son, to tell him I failed again." Her words hit him harder than any wound. He realized now the memory glass, the burned city, the boy in the hologram. It was her child, her only one, killed in the war humans started. Evan felt his chest tighten, guilt crawling through him. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Her golden eyes opened again, glistening faintly. "Sorry changes nothing," she said, her tone not cruel but broken. "Your kind took everything from me, and yet—" She stopped, her gaze falling on him. "Here you are, saving me from death." He didn't answer. He simply tightened the bandage on her wound and whispered, "Then let me start giving something back." Hours passed. The storm outside began to fade, leaving only the slow rhythm of dripping water. Evan stayed awake beside her, feeding the fire from broken furniture. He cleaned her wounds, gave her water, even shared a ration pack from his pocket. Kira watched him quietly, her pride struggling against gratitude. No servant had ever touched her. No friend had ever stayed beside her so long. And now, this fragile human, with trembling hands and stubborn eyes, refused to leave her side. At some point, she spoke again, her voice almost gentle. "My world was built on control, discipline, perfection," she said. "But you humans, you break everything you touch, and somehow, it grows back stronger." Evan smiled faintly. "That's because we don't know how to give up." Kyra's lips curved slightly, a rare, tired smile. She leaned back against the wall, whispering, "Then perhaps that is something worth learning." Outside, the first light of dawn began to push through the storm clouds. Golden rays touched the ruined halls, glinting off the shattered glass. Evan looked toward the horizon, exhausted but alive. For the first time since his forced marriage, he didn't feel like a prisoner. He felt like someone who had found purpose in chaos. Kyra's voice came again, softer than before. "When I was told to marry you, I thought it was punishment," she said. He glanced at her, surprised. She continued, "But maybe it was something else. A chance." Her fingers brushed his wrist, the same mark that bound them. The light from it glowed faintly again, but this time it didn't feel cold. Weeks passed after the storm. The mansion still stood, scarred but alive. Its broken halls glowed once again under Evan's careful repairs. Cracked walls were patched, energy lines restored, and the shattered memory glass sealed beneath soft golden fabric. Each repair was slow, each day heavy, but for the first time, it was peaceful. Lady Kira recovered slowly, though she still carried the faint glow of her healing wounds beneath her skin. Her movements were slower now, her voice quieter, but her eyes, they had changed. The sharp, cold fire in them had softened into something that looked almost human. Sometimes she would find Evan working in silence. He never complained, never rested for long. He repaired the generators, planted seeds in the ruined garden, cleaned the halls by hand. When she asked him why, he always gave the same answer: because someone has to care. And she had no reply. No one had cared for her house or for her in decades. The galaxy had changed outside their walls. News from the capital came through the remaining beacons. The Unity program was being dissolved, forced marriages annulled, all participants free to return to their home worlds. It was declared a failed experiment, a symbol of arrogance and political control. When the message reached them, Kyra stood silent for a long time, her gaze distant, her fingers brushing the silver mark on her wrist. Finally, she looked at Evan and said softly, "You're free now." The words hung in the air like the echo of a farewell. Evan looked at her carefully. "Free?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "The treaty bond will fade in 3 days. You can go back to your people, to your world." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window at the violet sea stretching endlessly beyond the cliffs. The same sea that had once terrified him now felt strangely like home. He nodded slowly. "I see. For the next few days." He worked silently. She watched him from afar, her heart twisting in ways she couldn't explain. He avoided eye contact, spoke less, and yet, every night, she found new things, fixed doors that opened smoothly, broken lights glowing again. He was preparing her world for when he'd be gone. And she hated how much that realization hurt, On the morning of the third day, a transport ship arrived through the storm clouds, silver and white, bearing the mark of the Human Council. It landed on the cliff platform, sending waves crashing below. Evan stood beside it, his small bag in hand. Kyra waited near the balcony, silent as the sea wind brushed her hair. The moment felt heavy. Two people standing on opposite sides of something invisible. He walked toward her slowly, stopping only a few feet away. "You're not saying goodbye?" he asked gently. Her eyes flickered with emotion. "I have nothing left to say." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll say it for both of us." He took a deep breath, his voice calm but trembling. "When I was forced to marry you, I thought it was punishment. 2, I thought I was being sent to live with a monster. But you weren't a monster. Kyra," he said softly, "you were a wound that never got to heal." Her golden eyes shimmered, a single tear escaping before she turned away. "Humans always find beauty in their pain," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, "because pain reminds us we're still alive." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver token she had given him long ago. He placed it on the railing beside her. "I fixed everything I could," he said quietly. "But the rest is yours now." Then he stepped back. She didn't look at him. Not until she heard the engines of the ship start to rise. The wind pulled at her robe, carrying the scent of the sea and the faint hum of memory. But then, just as the ship began to lift, the engine stopped. Evan turned around. Walking back toward her, her eyes widened slightly, disbelief crossing her face. He stopped only a few steps away, looking straight into her eyes. "I was forced to marry you once," he said softly. "But this time, I choose you." For a moment, everything was still. The waves below paused. The wind held its breath. Kyra stared at him, the golden light in her eyes flickering wildly. "You would give up your world." "For me?" she whispered. He smiled. "No. I'd give it up for us." Something in her broke, then not in pain, but in release. Her hand trembled as she reached out and touched his cheek. The sigil on their wrists glowed again, brighter than before. No longer a symbol of bondage, but of choice, of two beings from different worlds, bound not by law, but by compassion. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in months. Light spilled across the ruins, touching every scar, every stone, every memory. Evan and Kyra stood together on the balcony, the past behind them, the future uncertain. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Because sometimes, peace is not born in treaties or war. Sometimes it's born in the quiet hearts of those brave enough to care. And in the ruins of a forced union, love had found its home.